I want you to picture something for me. It's 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I'm standing in my own kitchen, in the dark, holding my husband's phone in my hand. My thumb is hovering over a text thread, and the name at the top of that thread isn't some stranger. It isn't some coworker with a cute smile. It's my sister's name, Amber. My little sister, the one I used to braid hair with when we were kids, the one who cried at my wedding, sobbed, actually, mascara running down her face saying she'd never seen two people more perfect for each other. That same Amber had just sent my husband a message that read, "She still doesn't suspect a thing. We're good." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone across the room like you'd expect. I set it down, exactly where I found it. I walked back to bed, and I lay down next to the man who'd been sleeping with my sister for, I would later find out, 11 months. And I smiled. Because in that moment, lying in the dark next to a man who thought he'd gotten away with something, I made a decision that would take me the better part of a year to carry out. A decision that would cost him everything. His marriage, his business, his reputation, and in the end, though he never saw it coming, his relationship with the one person he actually loved more than my sister, himself. This is the story of how I found out the two people I trusted most in this world had been lying to my face for almost a year, and how I never said a single word about it, not for 8 more months, while I quietly took apart everything they thought they'd built together. By the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why patience is the sharpest weapon there is. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, I tell true, personal revenge stories, the kind where someone gets betrayed in the worst way possible, and instead of blowing up in the moment, they get smart, they get patient, and they get even. This one is personal. This one is mine. I need to tell you right now, this story gets so much worse before it gets better. There's a moment coming up around the halfway mark that made my own therapist go quiet for a full 10 seconds. I'm not exaggerating. So if you're new here, do me a favor and hit subscribe now, because I promise you, you do not want to walk away before the ending. This one has a payoff you're going to want to see through to the end. Okay, let's go back to the beginning, because to understand how bad this got, you need to understand how good it looked from the outside. My name isn't going to be in this story. I'll just say I'm the narrator, and you can call me whatever you'd like in the comments. But for the sake of the story, let's call me Claire. Not my real name, but close enough for you to picture me. I was 31 years old when all of this started coming apart. I'd been married to my husband, I'll call him Daniel, for 6 years, together for 9. We met in our early 20s at a friend's barbecue, and it was one of those meetings that felt like it had been arranged by someone upstairs. He made me laugh so hard I choked on a piece of watermelon, and he ran inside to get me a glass of water like it was a medical emergency. I thought, okay, this one's different. For a long time, he was. Daniel was charming in that effortless way some men are, the kind of charm that makes waitresses linger a little longer at the table, makes his coworkers actually enjoy Monday meetings when he's running them. He was smart, funny, good with money. He built a small consulting business from nothing, and by the time we hit our 5th anniversary, it was doing well enough that we'd bought a house in a neighborhood I used to only drive through and admire. I worked as a project manager for a marketing firm. Steady job, decent pay, nothing flashy. But between the two of us, we were doing better than either of our families had ever done. We had a 5-year plan, we had a Pinterest board for a kitchen renovation. We had, on paper, everything. Here's the thing about on paper, though. Paper doesn't tell you anything about the cracks underneath. Looking back now, and this is the part where I want you to pay close attention, because I promise you these are the moments you'll recognize in your own life if you've ever been through something like this. There were signs, small ones, the kind you explain away because the alternative is too ugly to consider. Red flag number 1. About 2 years ago, Daniel started mentoring my younger sister Amber. She was 26 then, fresh out of a bad breakup, trying to figure out what to do with a marketing degree she wasn't using. Daniel offered to help her put together a business plan for a freelance social media consulting gig. Sweet, right? Big brother-in-law energy. I actually cried a little when he offered because my dad wasn't around for us growing up, and here was Daniel stepping up for my little sister the way I'd always wished someone would. I didn't think twice about the hours they spent on calls together. I didn't think twice about the quick coffee to go over her pitch deck. Why would I? This was Amber, my sister, the girl who used to sleep in my bed during thunderstorms until she was 12. Red flag number 2, Amber started coming around more, a lot more. Sunday dinners turned into Wednesday dinners, turned into, oh, I just stopped by to drop off a book 3 times a week. My mother even joked once at a family gathering, you 3 are closer than my own sisters and I ever were. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. Red flag number 3, and this one still makes my stomach turn when I think about it. About 8 months before I found that text, Daniel started going to the gym at 5:30 in the morning, said his back had been bothering him, wanted to build up his core. He'd shower there, come home smelling like a different soap than the one in our bathroom. I remember commenting on it once, "You smell like a different shampoo." And he laughed and said the gym's shower gel was just stronger scented. I believed him, because why wouldn't I? This is the part of these stories that people always ask me about in the comments. How didn't you know? Weren't there obvious signs? And here's my honest answer. When it's someone you trust completely, someone who has never given you a reason to build up your guard, you don't look for the crack in the wall. You live in the house. You don't go around inspecting the foundation every single day. You just live your life. There was a night about a year before everything blew up that I think about constantly now. We were all together, me, Daniel, Amber, my mom, at my parents' house for Easter. After dinner, Amber and Daniel were doing dishes together, laughing about something I couldn't hear from the living room. My mom leaned over to me and said, "It's so nice they get along so well." And I remember this so clearly, feeling this tiny cold flicker, not jealousy exactly, something quieter, something that didn't have a name yet. I looked at it for maybe 2 seconds, and then I let it go. Because that's what you do when you trust people. You let the small, cold flickers go because the alternative is becoming a person who suspects everyone, and I never wanted to be that person. I want to be really clear about something before we move into the next part of this story. I was happy, genuinely, deeply happy for most of those 6 years. This isn't a story about a woman who ignored 1,000 obvious signs because she was in denial. This is a story about 2 people who were very, very good at lying, and one woman who trusted the 2 people who had earned that trust for years. That's what makes what happened next so much worse, because it wasn't just betrayal, it was a betrayal built on a foundation of years of earned trust, engineered carefully, patiently, by 2 people who understood exactly how to keep it invisible. But what happened next, I never saw coming. It was a random Tuesday. Nothing special about the date, nothing anniversary adjacent, nothing that should have made that night different from any other night in 6 years of marriage. Daniel had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered. This wasn't unusual. He wasn't secretive about his phone, which in hindsight tells you something about how confident he was that I'd never look. A notification popped up on the lock screen. Just a name and a preview line, the way notifications do. Amber. She still doesn't suspect a thing. We're good. I stood there staring at those 11 words for what felt like a full minute. My brain did this thing where it tried to build 100 innocent explanations in about 2 seconds. Maybe it's about a surprise party. Maybe it's about mom's birthday gift. Maybe... But something in my gut already knew. You know that feeling? Where your body understands the truth about 4 seconds before your mind is willing to accept it? I picked up the phone. No passcode, he'd never needed one because I'd never given him a reason to think he needed one. I opened the thread. I'm not going to read you every message. Some of it, honestly, I still can't say out loud without my voice shaking, and I don't think you need to hear all of it to understand what I felt reading it in real time. But I'll tell you the shape of what I found. 11 months. 11 months of a relationship happening entirely inside my house, inside my family, right under the roof I paid half the mortgage on. The mentoring sessions? Some of them were real. Most of them by month 4 were not. The 5:30 a.m. gym trips? Sometimes the gym, sometimes Amber's apartment 12 minutes away. The different shampoo smell? Hers. And here's the detail that broke something in me that I don't think will ever fully repair, no matter how this story ends. There was a message from 3 weeks earlier, 3 weeks, where Amber said, and I'm paraphrasing only slightly, "I feel bad sometimes seeing her so happy, but I remind myself she's had 6 years of him. I'm allowed to want something too." She's had 6 years of him, like I'd been hoarding something, like my marriage was a resource she was entitled to a share of. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I had to sit with it for a lot longer than a second. My own sister had convinced herself that my happiness was somehow unfair to her, that loving my husband for 6 years meant I'd used up my turn and it was time to pass him along like a hand-me-down sweater. I scrolled further back. I found the first message, 10.5 months earlier. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a lightning bolt moment. It was Daniel texting her, "Don't tell your sister I said this, but you're actually better at this business stuff than half my clients." And her replying with 3 laughing emojis and, "Don't tell her I said this, but you're the only person in this family who ever really listens to me." That's how it starts, not with some grand seduction, with 2 people quietly building a secret language of don't tell her until eventually there was nothing left that they told me at all. I read for almost 40 minutes, standing in my kitchen, him showering 20 feet away, humming, completely unaware that his entire life had just cracked open on the counter next to the fruit bowl. I want to tell you what I wanted to do in that moment, because I think it's important you understand I am not some emotionless robot who calmly sipped tea while reading about my sister sleeping with my husband. What I wanted to do was scream. I wanted to throw that phone through the bathroom door. I wanted to call my sister right then, at midnight, and let every ugly word I had ever swallowed in my life come pouring out of me at once. I wanted, more than anything, to make them feel 1/10 of what I was feeling standing in that kitchen. But here's the thing about rage. Real rage, the kind that comes from betrayal this deep. It doesn't want to be spent all at once. If you've ever felt it, you know. The instinct to scream is actually the weakest version of that anger. The real anger, the kind that changes something, wants patience. It wants precision. Somewhere in that 40 minutes of reading text messages in my dark kitchen, something in me went very, very quiet and very, very cold. I heard the shower shut off. I put the phone back exactly where it had been, screen down, at the exact angle it was resting before. I walked to the bedroom. I got into bed, and when Daniel came out of the bathroom in his towel, humming some song from the radio, I said, "Hey, how was your shower?" And he said, "Good, babe. You good?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm good." I have never told a bigger lie in my entire life. And I want you to know I'd tell it again in a heartbeat, because that lie was the first move in a plan that was going to take almost a year to finish. Over the next few days, I did something that I think surprised even me. I didn't confront them. I didn't cry in front of them. I went to work. I made dinner. I laughed at Daniel's jokes. I texted my sister back with the same warmth I always had, hearts and exclamation points and all. I became, without question, the best actress either of them had ever seen. Because here's what I understood almost immediately, lying awake that first night. If I confronted them right then, in the heat of it, here's what would happen. Daniel would cry. He'd say it just happened. He'd say it didn't mean anything, which is somehow always what men say about relationships that lasted almost a year. Amber would sob and say she was in a dark place and I was her only real family and she never meant to hurt me. My mother would get involved and try to smooth things over because family is family. And within 6 months, at some Thanksgiving somewhere down the line, I'd be expected to sit at the same table as both of them like nothing happened, because it's been long enough. I was not going to let that happen. I needed information first. I needed to know exactly how deep this went, financially, logistically, emotionally, before I made a single move. Because the difference between someone who gets revenge and someone who gets played twice is patience, is preparation. So for the next several weeks, I became a quiet observer in my own life. I started noticing things I'd been too trusting to notice before. The business trip to Denver that lined up suspiciously well with a girls' trip Amber took the same week. The credit card statement with a hotel charge Daniel explained away as a client dinner ran long, I just crashed there instead of driving home. The Venmo request from Amber to Daniel, labeled simply thanks, for an amount that made my stomach drop when I did the math on what that could have been for. I found a second phone, hidden in his gym bag, behind a false bottom in a shoe compartment, because apparently my husband had upgraded from just being a cheater to being a cheater with a budget for concealment gear. That phone had photos. It had voice memos. It had 11 months of a relationship that had been built brick by brick inside the walls of the life I thought we were building together. I'm going to be honest with you. There were nights during this period where I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot and just cried until I couldn't breathe. Because acting normal all day, every day, while carrying this, it takes something out of you that doesn't come back easily. If you've ever had to smile at someone who betrayed you because you weren't ready to show your hand yet, you know exactly what I mean.
But every single time I wanted to break, to scream, to confront, to burn it all down in one reckless night, I reminded myself of one thing. They had 11 months. I could have 11 weeks. Because during those weeks of quiet observation, I found something else, something that changed the entire shape of my plan. Daniel's business, the consulting firm he'd built, the one both our names were legally tied to in ways he didn't fully remember when he signed certain documents 5 years earlier, had a problem, a big one. And Amber, in her enthusiasm to be indispensable to the man she was sleeping with, had made herself a very, very useful part of that problem. But what happened next, I never saw coming. Let me back up and explain something about Daniel's business, because this is the piece that made everything possible. 5 years earlier, when Daniel was starting his consulting firm, he needed capital. I had savings from before we got married, inheritance from my grandmother, actually, money I'd kept separate but agreed to loan into the business as a startup investment. We did it properly. A lawyer drew up paperwork. I was listed as a 15% equity stakeholder and a secured creditor on the loan, meaning if the business ever failed or was sold or restructured, I had legal standing, not just as a wife, but as an actual documented financial partner. Daniel had, over the years, sort of forgotten this. Or more accurately, he'd convinced himself it didn't matter anymore because we're married. What's mine is yours, which is a very convenient thing to believe until it very much isn't. Here's the second piece. Amber, eager, ambitious, and apparently willing to do anything to make herself irreplaceable to Daniel, had been quietly taking on more and more responsibility inside the business. Not officially, no title, no contract, no paper trail that made her a real employee, just helping, managing his client communications, handling some of his social media accounts,
Even, I discovered, having access to certain shared drives with sensitive client information and financial projections. She was doing real work, valuable work, and she was doing it all completely off the books, unpaid, because she believed, I found this in a message and it still makes me feel something complicated to this day, that eventually when Daniel figured things out with me, she'd be his actual business partner, in every sense of the word. So here is what I understood sitting with all of this information. Daniel had built a life that looked, on paper, like it belonged entirely to him, but it didn't. 15% of that business and legal standing over the loan that helped start it belonged to me, and the woman helping him run it, the woman he was planning a future with, had absolutely nothing protecting her. No equity, no contract, no legal claim to anything they were building together. She thought she was building a future. She was building my exit strategy. I want to be very clear with you about something, because I think it matters. What I planned was not illegal. It was not violent. It did not involve hurting anyone physically or doing anything that could land me in a courtroom on the wrong side of a case. Everything that followed was built on things I was already legally entitled to, information I was allowed to gather, and decisions that were entirely within my rights to make as a business partner, a spouse, and a person who had been deeply wronged. Revenge doesn't have to break the law to be devastating. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to someone is simply stop protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. Step 1. I needed a lawyer. Quietly. I found a family law attorney 2 towns over, somewhere I wouldn't run into anyone we knew, and I brought her every piece of financial documentation from our marriage, my original investment paperwork, our joint tax returns, the business's operating agreement. She confirmed what I suspected. My 15% stake was tight. My creditor status gave me significant leverage, and depending on how a divorce was structured, I had grounds to request a forensic accounting of the business, given irregularities I'd already started documenting. Irregularities like unpaid labor, undisclosed contractor relationships, and the fact that client funds had, on at least 2 occasions, been used to cover what looked suspiciously like personal expenses. Hotel rooms, restaurant dinners, gifts. My attorney looked at me after going through everything and said, "You understand you're sitting on more leverage than most people in your situation ever get." I said, "I know. I've been paying attention my whole life for this." Step 2. I needed allies who didn't know they were allies yet. This is the part where I have to tell you about my brother, Tyler. Tyler is 2 years younger than me, works in IT, and has always had a complicated relationship with Amber. Not hateful, just distant, the kind of sibling relationship where you love each other but don't necessarily like spending time together. Tyler also happened to be incredibly good at something I needed: quietly and legally recovering deleted data and documenting digital timestamps in a way that would hold up if things ever got contentious. I didn't tell Tyler everything at first. I told him I suspected Daniel was hiding business income, and I needed help understanding some financial software the business used, since Tyler had done IT consulting for small businesses before. It wasn't a full lie, it just wasn't the whole truth yet. It only took him about a week of quietly poking around, with my legal access as a business stakeholder, mind you, nothing hacked, nothing stolen, before he called me and said, "Hey, I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say this gently." He'd found things: client emails, shared calendars, a folder embarrassingly labeled Amber Misk that contained, among other things, drafts of a business proposal for a rebrand that listed Amber as co-founder and creative director, a title that existed nowhere in any legal document, but very much existed in the mind of the 2 people planning to eventually build a life and a business together. I told Tyler everything that day, all of it. And my brother, who I want to say sat in stunned silence on the phone for almost 30 full seconds before saying anything, became the second person I trusted with this plan. His reaction, by the way, whatever you need, I mean it, whatever you need. Step 3, timing. This is the part that requires the most discipline, and honestly, the part I'm proudest of, because everything I've told you so far, the lawyer, the documentation, Tyler's help, all of that could have been rushed. I could have filed for divorce the week after I found those messages. I could have confronted Amber the second Tyler found that folder. But I needed one more thing before I moved. Daniel's business needed to close a major client deal that was in progress, a 3-year retainer contract with a mid-sized regional company, worth enough money that if it fell apart at the wrong moment, it would be catastrophic. I needed that deal to close first, because a business with a signed, valuable, ongoing contract is worth vastly more in a divorce settlement and in a forensic accounting dispute than a business in free fall. I wasn't trying to destroy value, I was trying to make sure there was maximum value to claim my rightful share of. So I waited. 2 more months. I sat at dinner tables with my sister. I hugged her at my mother's birthday party. I let Daniel kiss me goodnight. Every single day, I woke up and reminded myself the version of me that explodes today gets 15% of nothing and a lifetime of people saying, well, you did kind of go scorched earth. The version of me that waits gets everything she's owed and watches them lose it all without me ever having to raise my voice. I chose the second version of me. A near risk, though, I have to tell you about this because it almost fell apart. About 6 weeks before I made my move, Amber called me crying. She said she and her on-and-off boyfriend from before had gotten into a huge fight and she needed to talk to someone and could she come stay at my place for a couple nights. I remember standing in my kitchen, the same kitchen, phone against my ear, and having to decide in about 4 seconds whether I could physically host the woman sleeping with my husband in my own home without cracking. I said yes, because saying no would have raised questions I wasn't ready to answer yet. She stayed 2 nights. On the second night, I heard her on the phone in the guest room, voice low, saying, I know, just a little longer, I promise, she has no idea. And Daniel, lying next to me in our bed, checked his phone under the covers like he thought I was asleep. I lay there in the dark, my sister 15 feet away lying to her boyfriend's replacement in whispers, my husband checking messages from her under our shared blanket, and I did not make a sound. That night was the closest I came to breaking, and it's also the night I finalized every last detail of the plan, because I realized something in that moment. They weren't just betraying me, they had built an entire second life, an entire second relationship running in parallel underneath mine, and they had gotten so comfortable in it that they'd started getting sloppy. Sloppy people make mistakes, and I had spent 2 months building a case that didn't leave room for mistakes on my end. I had my lawyer, I had my documentation, I had my brother, I had the business deal closing in 3 weeks, and I had, this is the part I'm still genuinely so proud of, an appointment already scheduled with my attorney to file the moment that contract was signed. Everything was in place, but what happened next, I never saw coming. The client contract closed on a Thursday, 3-year retainer, signed, sealed, worth more to that business than almost anything else Daniel had built in 5 years. I filed for divorce the following Monday. I didn't do it quietly, the way most people expect. I did it exactly the way my attorney and I had planned, down to the hour. Here's what happened, laid out the way it unfolded. 9 a.m., my attorney filed the divorce petition, along with a formal request for temporary restraining provisions on business assets given documented irregularities. the misused client funds, the undisclosed co-founder who had access to sensitive financial data with zero contractual protection or NDA, and my documented 15% equity stake with creditor status on the original loan. 9:15, Daniel was served at his office, in front of, as it happens, the client whose contract had just closed 4 days earlier, because process servers don't exactly wait for
Convenient timing, and my attorney had made sure the paperwork went out the moment the courthouse opened. 9:20 roughly, my mother called me, panicked, because apparently Daniel had called her in a full-blown crisis, saying he had no idea what was happening, that I'd blindsided him, that there had to be some misunderstanding. I let her call go to voicemail. For the first time in my adult life, I let a call from my own mother go to voicemail on purpose. 11 in the morning. This is the part I want you to really sit with. My attorney had also included, as part of the initial filing package, a formal notice to the business's other shareholders and to that specific client's legal team. Standard practice when a business owner's marital assets tied to the company are in dispute, disclosing that an internal forensic accounting review had been requested due to documented irregularities in expense reporting. I want to be clear. This wasn't me trying to sabotage the deal maliciously. This was standard legal disclosure that my attorney was required to make given the circumstances. But Daniel didn't know that distinction in the moment. All he knew was that 4 days after signing the biggest contract of his career, his brand new client's legal team received a notice mentioning irregularities and forensic review in the same document as his divorce filing. The client, understandably nervous about entering a 3-year relationship with a business under active financial scrutiny, invoked a due diligence clause and paused the retainer, pending review. Daniel's biggest win of the year turned into his biggest liability in the span of about 6 hours. I need you to understand. I want to make sure this is crystal clear. I never once lied in any of this. I never fabricated a single document. Everything my attorney submitted was true, documented, and legally required given what I'd found. The irregularities were real. The forensic accounting request was real and legitimate, and something I was fully entitled to as both a spouse in a divorce and a documented business stakeholder. I didn't destroy his business. I simply stopped shielding him from the consequences of running it the way he'd been running it. Now, Amber. This is the part a lot of you have probably been waiting for, and I promise you it does not disappoint. Because Amber had no legal standing in that business whatsoever. No contract, no equity, no paper trail proving she was owed a single dollar for 11 months of unpaid co-founder work. When the forensic review began and the business's finances got put under a microscope, one of the very first things that surfaced was a pattern of unexplained payments and reimbursements to a woman with no employment agreement, no tax documentation as a contractor, and no clear deliverables tied to those payments. To the forensic accountant, and eventually to the IRS, because unreported cash payments over a certain threshold tend to attract exactly that kind of attention once they're flagged, this looked at best like sloppy bookkeeping, and at worst like something considerably more serious. Amber, who thought she was building toward a future as a co-founder, found out in the ugliest possible way that she had actually spent 11 months as an undocumented, unprotected, financially exposed nobody, someone with every possible liability of being deeply entangled in a business and none of the protections. When the dust settled, she wasn't just publicly known as the woman who slept with her sister's husband. She was also the name flagged in a financial irregularities review, unable to prove she'd done legitimate work, facing the very real and very expensive possibility of having to answer questions about unreported income she never even properly received the benefit of. Because most of it, it turned out, Daniel had been quietly funneling back into covering their secret dates and hotel stays. She got the risk, she never got the reward.
I want to give you a moment here. This is the moment I need you to just sit back and go, yes. Because when my attorney called to walk me through the forensic findings, she said something I will never forget. She said, "Whatever you did to document this ahead of time, it's the cleanest case I've handled in years. You basically built this yourself." I did. 11 weeks of quiet observation against their 11 months of quiet betrayal, and I won. Here comes the twist, the one I told you at the beginning that I never saw coming. About 5 weeks into the divorce proceedings, with Daniel's business reeling, the client relationship on ice, and Amber facing her own financial mess, I got a phone call from someone I never expected to hear from in the middle of all this. The client. The one whose contract had been paused. Her name, I'll call her Renata, was the owner of the regional company that had signed the 3-year retainer. She'd done some digging of her own once the due diligence pause kicked in, partly out of self-interest, partly because, as she told me directly, she'd been quietly uneasy about Daniel for weeks and just hadn't been able to name why. Renata told me she'd found out through her own network that Daniel had approached one of her direct competitors 6 weeks before finalizing the contract with her company, using confidential strategy information gathered during their early negotiation process to try to negotiate a better, more exclusive deal, essentially trying to see if he could get a bigger payday by playing 2 competing companies against each other using insider information from both sides. That's not just unethical. In the world of client consulting contracts, that's the kind of thing that ends careers. And it had nothing to do with me or Amber or the divorce. It turns out my calm, patient unraveling of Daniel's personal life had accidentally shone a light directly onto a completely separate scheme he'd been running professionally, one that had nothing to do with betraying me and everything to do with betraying his own client's trust. Renata didn't just walk away from the contract. She reported him to a small industry association he belonged to, one that handled ethics complaints for independent consultants seeking certain referral certifications. Within 2 months, Daniel didn't just lose one client, he lost his professional standing entirely. Word got around. This industry, apparently, is smaller than he ever let on to me, and consulting work that used to come easily through referrals simply stopped coming at all. This is the second moment I want you to scream at your screen, because here is the truth. The man who spent 11 months carefully, deliberately building a secret second life, hiding phones, hiding shampoo, hiding a co-founder who wasn't real, had also apparently been quietly building an entirely separate betrayal against the people paying his actual bills. And it was only because I stopped protecting his secrets that both betrayals came crashing down at the exact same time. The divorce settlement, once everything was said and done, gave me my full 15% equity value, repayment of my original loan with the interest terms specified in our original documentation, and, because of the documented financial irregularities, a significantly favorable division of what remained of the business's actual liquid assets, since a judge does not look kindly on a spouse who's been funneling shared marital funds toward an affair for the better part of a year. Daniel kept the business in name, what was left of it, a shell of client relationships, a damaged reputation in a small industry, and a mountain of legal fees. Amber kept nothing but a lesson she'll be paying for, financially and personally, for a long time. I want to take a second here because I know some of you are waiting for the moment with my mother, and I promised you this gets worse before it gets better, and this is that moment. My mother did not immediately side with me. For the first 2 weeks after everything came out, my mother kept saying things like, "There has to be a way to fix this as a family," and "You two used to be so close," like closeness excuses betrayal, like the 11 months of lying somehow mattered less because Amber and I used to share a bedroom as kids. It took my mother actually reading the timeline, actual dates, actual messages Tyler had helped me responsibly and legally document, actual financial records, before something in her finally broke and she understood this wasn't a disagreement between sisters. This was a calculated, sustained betrayal, dressed up as family closeness for almost a year. She called me, crying, and said, "I raised her better than this. I don't understand how she looked at you every single week and did this." I told her the truth. She didn't think she was doing anything to me. She thought she was owed something, and I was just in the way of her getting it. That's the third moment, if you're keeping count. The moment you realize the betrayal wasn't just about a marriage, it was about a sister who had convinced herself somewhere along the way that my happiness had an expiration date, and once it expired, whatever I had was fair game. I moved out of the house. Actually, I kept the house in the settlement, and Daniel moved out, 6 months to the day after I first read that text message in my dark kitchen. I stood in that same kitchen, alone this time, and I let myself finally cry, not out of grief for the marriage, out of relief that the acting was finally over. Here's what I learned, and I think this is worth sharing no matter what you're going through right now. The version of me that wanted to scream in that kitchen the night I found those messages, she wasn't wrong to feel that way. That rage was earned, every bit of it. But rage that gets spent immediately gets spent cheaply. It feels good for about 10 minutes and then it's gone, and you're left standing in the wreckage you created with nothing to show for it except the reputation of being the crazy ex. Patience isn't about pretending you're not hurt. I was hurt every single day of those 8 months. Patience is choosing to let your hurt fuel precision instead of chaos. It's choosing to build something solid while everyone around you assumes you're too broken to build anything at all. I don't talk to my sister anymore. I don't know if I ever will again. Some bridges, once they're burned all the way down, don't rebuild, and honestly, I've made peace with that. My mother and I are healing, slowly, in the way families do after something like this cracks the foundation. Daniel, last I heard, is doing small freelance gigs under a different business name, trying to rebuild a reputation that isn't coming back easily. And me? I got my house, I got my money, I got my name back, and I got something I didn't expect to find in all of this. I got proof that I could survive the 2 biggest betrayals of my life and come out the other side smarter, calmer, and stronger than I walked in. So here's what I want to leave you with. If you're sitting on a betrayal right now, big or small, recent or years old, you do not owe anyone the satisfaction of watching you fall apart in real time. You are allowed to be patient. You are allowed to be quiet. You are allowed to let people believe they've gotten away with something for exactly as long as it takes you to make sure they haven't. I want to hear from you. If you were in my position, standing in that kitchen at 11:47 p.m., phone in your hand, what would you have done? Would you have confronted them right there? Would you have waited the way I did? Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And if this story meant something to you, hit subscribe because there are so many more of these coming. And trust me, some of them are even wilder than this one. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. I'll see you in the next story.